Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of mine, of future ages, when they listen to or watch this. This is Unpacked. I am Adam Pakila. It is podcast number 3. Today's topic, science. I feel like this is an appropriate topic for today, May 20th, right around 9 p.m., because everything that's going on with the coronavirus in our current climate. In Connecticut, today, May 20th, was the first day we started to have loosening of restrictions. And a lot of people are going to be watching it really closely to see how it affects the numbers of people infected. And hopefully, if the numbers continue to go down with this increased activity and proximity to other people, we can start to return to some sense of normalcy, whatever that means in the post-COVID life. But more importantly, we can ascertain using scientific approaches the effectiveness and then make decisions for the future. So I'm not going to talk about the coronavirus. I am not going to talk about virus transmission. I am not going to talk about PPE usage or wearing. I am not going to talk about effective treatments. I'm not going to talk about mortality or death rates or any of that type of stuff, because I try to stay in my lane. And my lane is behavior analysis. Yes, behavior analysis is a science, and I'm going to get into why in a second. But that makes me a scientist. Aside from the fact that I have this awesome shirt, back off, man, I'm a scientist. Bill Murray is Peter Venkman from Ghostbusters. Shout out if you already knew that. But ABA is the science of behavior because it follows certain principles. And full disclosure, I did take some notes just that way I can go through this a little bit more fluently rather than having to recall what's stored up here in my brain. So the first thing, science is much more than beakers and test tubes and experiments and biology and earth science and physics and all that type of stuff. It's way more than that. It's a general approach to life and using certain principles. I'm going to go over them for you right now. Determinism is one of the principles of science. It is that people that follow the scientific method and follow science as, I don't want to say a religion, but a philosophy, is because we believe that things are based on cause and effect relations and lawfulness. Everything can be determined. So things don't just happen randomly. They don't just occur out of the blue. There's a cause and effect for them. If you don't know what the cause and effect is, it might seem like magic, it might seem like a miracle, but there is a general understanding, if you practice determinism, that there is a cause and effect lawfulness to the universe. And we are part of that universe. So therefore, there's lawfulness to everything that goes on around us. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that there's not a cause and effect and it's not lawful. Okay, let's move on. There's also the principle of empiricism, and that's based on facts, observation, and experimentation. We get facts from conducting experiments where we observe the cause and effect relationship. So there are independent variables and dependent variables. Okay? As you manipulate the independent variables, it affects the dependent variable. The dependent variable is dependent on the independent variables. So I can change time. Time is always an independent variable. I can't change time. I can monitor time, and over the course of time, the dependent variable may change. Like more people will become infected with the virus if nothing is done. There's no intervention. The passage of time will allow there to be more people infected. So empiricism, one of the examples that's written down here is an emperor observes from his throne. You can observe everything. Also, they're going to be dictating things, but they're observing things. So you sit down and you kind of have an overall view looking down on the world, and you manipulate variables to see the cause and effect relationship between those things. The next is experimentation, which is part of empiricism. It's the manipulation of variables and taking measurements and collecting data that yields answers. Okay? So you don't just put two things in an experiment and call it that and see where the cause and effect relationship is. You need to have a control group. You need to have, there's different levels to experiments. And a lot of times you can't even factor in all of the variables. There are confounding variables that you might not be able to factor in when you conceptualize the experiment, but as you go on and as you continue in the process of experimentation and you change variables, you might realize that the results are different. And one of the variables you might have left out at the beginning, you realize is a factor, and you manipulate it later on. You realize that that's really the reason why there's a change occurring, not one of your first hypothesized variables that are changed. So another part of science is replication. And this is really huge when it comes to the field of science in general, because it's not fancy. Not really sure how many of you have seen The Big Bang Theory, but I think his name is Leonard. Leonard was essentially not devising experiments. He was taking experiments that other people had already conducted and replicating them to see if he got the same sort of results. Because being that there is a lawfulness to science, you should be able to emulate the experiment that Joe Schmo did at XYZ University and get the same results. And then Susie Q can replicate that exact same thing. And now you, Susie Q, and Joe Blow all have the same results. So as that goes on, your experimentation and your replication, as it's replicated more and more and more and sees the same effects over and over and over again, that strengthens the theory that was formed from the hypothesis for that scientific experiment. Okay? Most recently, there was a YouTube video that came out about a whistleblower called Plandemic, and the person was considered an expert in her field, but her research was unable to be replicated. And in that sense, it might have been initially published, but if the results are different, drastically different in replications, subsequent replications, it really sheds light on possibility that the initial experiment wasn't well crafted or should be kind of taken with a grain of salt. Or maybe it needs to be thrown out altogether. Maybe there was manipulation of data or statistics and there wasn't good experimental control, and therefore the experiment in and of itself is not valid, so therefore the results are not valid. So it's not fancy. You're not going to be, in Leonard's case from The Big Bang Theory, his mother constantly gave him little jabs in the side about the fact that he didn't have any original research and he was just replicating others' research. So when it comes to that type of stuff, it's not fancy, it's not glorifying, but it is necessary when it comes to advancing science in whatever field you're trying to advance science. The next one is pretty much my favorite. It's parsimony. And parsimony is generally, I would say more often than not always, but more often than not, the simplest explanation and the most logical explanation is the correct explanation. So let's just take a subject that's near and dear to my heart, flat Earth. Is it easier to think that the Earth revolves around the sun and is the exact same general shape as all of the other planets we've been able to observe? Or do we think that everything revolves around us and we're different, defying the laws of physics and gravity as we know them through numerous experiments and replications of those experiments? Or do we think that it is a hoax perpetrated by the Illuminati, the Bilderberg Group, whatever big government conspiracy or New World Order is out there to convince us, that big globe, convince us that the world is flat, and the effort that would be required to do that would be so immense, it would almost be counterintuitive. So let's use parsimony. Just because you don't understand math, just because you don't understand science, doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that you don't understand it. So finding an explanation that you do understand doesn't make it right. It just makes it that you understand it. Science does not care about your feelings. If you don't understand physics, if you don't understand quantum theory, it doesn't make it any less right. So just because your feelings are hurt internally, you feel sad because you suck at math. I suck at math too. Doesn't mean that you get to take a narrative that somebody else spits out in a YouTube video and hold on to it like a security blanket for a 2-year-old and cling to that because that's what you understand. All right? Parsimony will get you further than holding on to that theory from YouTube like a security blanket. Just think critically for a second and think of the most logical, simplest explanation. All right? It's probably that the world is round. It's not exactly round. And that it orbits around the sun, and that gravity is a real thing. Just go with that. You'll be a much happier person if you do. Then we have philosophical doubt. And aside from parsimony being my favorite, philosophical doubt is the one that I think is the most important. I know that there are a lot of people in my own field that do fantastic research. And I've read fantastic papers written by these amazing behavior analysts, whether they're talking about real life, in vivo experimentations, or they're talking about in a lab doing, simulations, or they're doing animal tests and experiments with animals in a laboratory type setting. Either way, I go into, after I do my little Boolean search on the library website that I'm using, into, ProQuest or ERIC or wherever I'm using to search for scientific peer-reviewed journal articles, I still go in with doubt that I'm not necessarily trying to disprove it, but I'm trying to find its flaws while I'm reading it. So I'll read it and be like, that N is way too small. They're only talking about like 60 people. So I don't know if necessarily this is going to be the best to extrapolate out to a large population, but it might be beneficial for my one client. But either way, that's, there's a better study out there that has a higher N, that has a higher number of subjects that are involved in the study. Or maybe there's that person works for a company that does facilitated communication and augmented communication devices, and they're here talking about how beneficial their product is based on, as compared to other people's products in the same industry. So they might have a little conflict of interest there. So I always go into those articles, even with people that are fantastic and have done a great deal of work, I always go into that with a little bit of doubt. I seek the truth through scientific means, not through validation of my own preconceived opinions, notions, or hypotheses. I don't go and look for proving that social stories are garbage, which, by the way, they are. Or, proving that punishment is less effective than reinforcement, which, in fact, it is for a majority of people. But in some situations, it's not. I would look for maybe this type of behavior and this type of intervention and see what the results are. I actually really like when I watch a study unfold and the results are not good, but it was still published. And then you can engage in the discussion that they have afterwards, after they share the results, and they talk about possibly the reasons why their hypothesis was flawed and ways that it can be improved upon in the future. I really enjoy that. They kind of have philosophical doubt embedded within their own research articles, which is fantastic. So those are the 6 principles of science. We've got determinism, empiricism, experimentation, replication, parsimony, and philosophical doubt. All of those are extremely important when it comes to science. And if something that you're watching, reading, listening to doesn't click all of those boxes or enough of those boxes, then you got to be kind of wary of whether it is in fact science. So going forward, I also would like to talk a little bit about these fallacies or kind of buzzwords that are being thrown around right now. And the first is the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a phenomenon. It's not really a phenomenon, but it's an effect where essentially a cognitive bias is held by a person who believe that they possess more knowledge on a subject purely because they have some knowledge on a subject. So they think that they're smarter and more informed than they actually are. Okay? So that'd be like me sitting here and saying, I understand applied behavior analysis. So I'm going to take that and say that I understand how to best train pit bulls. I understand the concept of training pit bulls. I understand the concept of applied behavior analysis as it relates to training an organism to perform a certain type of behavior. I have not put it to practice with training dogs, other than my own one little dog that I had. I don't understand pit bull mentality. I don't understand their demeanor. I don't understand their specific breed behaviors. I don't understand the warning signs. I don't understand a lot of things. I haven't been taught that. So for me to have a minimal amount of knowledge on how to train animals, that if I were to then start expounding to somebody about how this is how you should train a pit bull specifically, I could be talking out of my ass. That is a Dunning-Kruger effect. I have a cognitive bias that I have more knowledge on a subject than I actually do. Chances are you're not the type of person who should expound and explain and school or try to dunk on somebody for something that you have no formal education in. And I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit on this later when we talk about subject matter experts. But for the most part, there's a reason why there are professionals and there are specific people that are called in as subject matter experts for certain subjects. It's because they've devoted more time than you could possibly dream of to this one specific topic. Okay? Think about the thing that you've done for the most amount of time in your entire life. And then imagine someone asks you a question completely unrelated to that. And the person answering it has just as much experience with that thing as you do with the most important thing to you in your entire life that you spent your entire life working on. Who are you going to really listen to? Are you going to listen to somebody that has your level of knowledge on that topic, or someone that has that level of knowledge on the topic? Hopefully it would be that person. But let's flip the script. Let's say that you're the subject matter expert. You're the person that's devoted your entire life to this. You have this moron coming over and telling you what's what about the thing that they know nothing about. How would you feel in that situation? So again, Dunning-Kruger effect is cognitive bias where you think you're smarter than you actually are just because you have a little bit of intellect. I personally am terrified of this effect. So I generally approach things from I'm a moron, I have no idea. School me, teach me. And I'll come at you and ask rational questions, but generally I'm thinking I'm less knowledgeable on a subject because I'm skeptical of my own knowledge. That philosophical doubt creeps in on my own knowledge. All right? So be wary of that. You probably don't know as much as you think you are. Don't think that you're the smartest person in the room. Just like don't think you're the baddest motherfucker in the room. There's always somebody smarter. There's always somebody badder. Okay? So, another thing is pigeon chess. I like this term just because it's funny. In the current climate of social media, this goes on a lot. It generally has to do with when you have an argument or a debate or a conversation with somebody who is completely ill-equipped to have that conversation. They're showing up to a gunfight with a knife. So, or in actuality, they're showing up to a gunfight with a banana. Like there's no way. They're not John Wick, okay? They can't beat you with just a pencil in a room full of trained assassins. So Pigeon Chess was coined in 2005 during a review of a book called Evolution and Creationism, where the guy says, debating creationists on the topic of evolution is rather like trying to play chess with a pigeon. It knocks the pieces over, craps on the board, and then flies back to its flock to claim victory. It's because the person that you're having a conversation with lacks the fundamental knowledge to even have a coherent argument formed before they can even start having a debate. Their semblance of thought is so askew and so far off even the starting line that when you start talking with them, everything is going over their head. But again, they've got this cognitive bias where they think that they understand, so they keep arguing and it makes no sense. So this is like playing chess with a pigeon. And then when you give up because you're like, you're a moron, they sit there and they're like, I won! I dunked on them! I outsmarted them! In actuality, any person that would be watching it would say, no, that person is a moron. But they're so apart from the reality of the situation that they think that they won. So I really like this term. I think it's super funny. Another thing is sea lioning. And this specifically deals with a tactic that people employ specifically online, but I'm sure you could do it in person. But it was specifically coined for online. Trolling and harassment consists of pursuing people with persistent requests for evidence or repeated questions while maintaining a pretense of civility and sincerity. They're constantly asking for proof of things when they in actuality have no interest in what you're saying. They're just constantly, it's like they've dialed their philosophical doubt up to 11, and there's no way that they're going to be convinced that the arguments being put forth are valid, or they're probably even reading them. They're just trying to exhaust the other person until they give up, and that's all there is to it. So sea lioning is much more nefarious because I don't think that there's any actual good intention behind it. Whereas playing, pigeon chess, I don't think that the pigeon in this case, knows that they're a pigeon. But the sea lion knows that they're a sea lion, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to come at it very respectfully. They're saying, oh, well, can you provide me, more documentation on that? And you give them 14 articles from the National Institute of Health and, pediatric journals and so on and so forth. And they're like, yeah, but what about this? And then they ask you for more stuff and they refute this thing, but it's not really based on anything. So it's really difficult to engage with somebody that's practicing this sea lion tactic. Another thing is the fireheart of falsehood. And this is something that came up again with the pandemic YouTube video specifically, it's a propaganda technique in which a large number of messages are broadcast rapidly, repetitively, and continuously over multiple channels, such as news and social media, without regard for truth or consistency. Full disclosure, I don't think that anything should be removed from the internet ever, so long as it's legal. I think that anything that is legal in print form should be allowed on the internet. With that being said, if something is illegal and is on the internet, it should be taken off. If something is legal, it should be kept on, even if it's on a private platform such as YouTube or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. I don't think that those entities have the right. They do have the ability. I don't think they have the right to take those things off, because what will happen is exactly this. You have a firehood of falsehood in which they claim, the people whose things are taken down claim that it is legitimized by the fact that they are trying to be silenced, and therefore they push it out over multiple channels. Like, share it on YouTube before it gets taken down, download this and then share it once it gets taken down. They're almost banking on the fact that it gets taken down, and they're sending it out on Facebook, they're sending it out on Instagram, they're sending it on, Snapchats, and they're sending it on Twitter, and it's taken down and another person re-uploads it. So they're constantly bombarded, and the more it gets taken down, the more the stock for these people who believe in it falsely, it rises for them. So by trying to combat ignorance with silence and censorship, you're actually leading to more people being distrusting and disbelieving of the organization or the entity that is doing the censorship in the first place. Again, personally, I think just let it be out there so that you can have people that say this is a refutation video to Plandemic, or this is a refutation to Andrew Wakefield with vaccines and autism. And you can post clips side by side and you can show exactly why they're wrong. And sometimes you get into really good debates. There was a Joe Rogan Experience podcast episode where a vegan MMA fighter put out a documentary, and he had a debate with a nutrition journalist, who I think has a master's in nutrition. But they had a debate, and the nutrition journalist, and I don't want to call him a scientist because he was a journalist, was trying to refute a lot of the claims that the MMA vegan filmmaker made, and the vegan filmmaker had a lot of good rebuttals. Now, I personally don't practice veganism. It's not for me, but I think it has merit. So if there are elements of a documentary that are patently false, they should be called out. That documentary shouldn't be removed. I think it should be kept up there so that people can see that it's false, and it doesn't give it more credence by taking it down, more legitimacy by taking it down, because they're trying to be censored. So again, Firehood of Falsehood is constantly bombarding people with fake information through multiple channels rapidly and incessantly and repeatedly. One of the most frustrating things, I can kind of notice all the other things, but one of the most frustrating things for me is when it comes to people engaging in debates and they move the goalposts. Most recently, and I got out of this really, really quick, with this increased amount of time that all of us have, because we weren't able to, before today, go out and do a lot of social things or do a lot of the activities we had previously done when it comes to large crowds, or certain things were closed down. A lot of us were stuck home, and we just kind of retreated into the digital world. And I got involved in a discussion about vaccines via Facebook with a person in one of the town groups I'm a part of. And first of all, don't do that, because then the algorithm kept showing me more posts by this person that I engaged with, because they weren't reading the engagement. They weren't reading the tone of the words that were going on back and forth, as far as I could tell. It was just that, I was engaging with Jane, so we're going to keep engaging with Jane. So every time Jane posted, it popped up on my news feed, and I had to ignore it, and I had to move on with it, and it just kept showing it to me because that's what I engaged with. So I had to stop engaging, so I stopped being made angry by these previous engagements. Either way, so what happened was, there is, I forget the exact terminology, but I'll call it VAERS. It's the Voluntary Vaccine Injury Reporting website. All it is a voluntary, non-vetted, non-reviewed, anyone can go on. It's almost like the Wikipedia of vaccine injuries, probably even less so, because there's no refutations to claims and there's no comments based on claims. So if you're hurt or perceived to be hurt by a vaccine, you go into this database and you voluntarily put in your information, and you essentially write down what you think happened. It is in no way, shape, or form a diagnosis. It is no way, shape, or form talking about experimentation or empiricism with a direct cause and effect. It's that I got a fever 3 days after I got my, shingles vaccine booster. So I think that came from that. So I'm going to put that on there. And then I, lost work, and I was really, really sick, and all these other things happened from it. What people that are anti-vaccine will do is they will use this vaccine reporting document or database to legitimize vaccine injuries. Okay? These are claims. They're not proof. So when you have somebody that, as I did, that was using this reporting platform as a judgment platform that shows, look how many people were injured by vaccines, that can be written by any crazy person on the street that said they were injured by a vaccine. It's not a valid source of statistics. And when I pointed that out, they said, well, that might be, but people still do get injured from vaccines. I said, yes, but your entire argument hinged on the fact that you said this many people get hurt from vaccines, and that number is unsubstantiated. So they said, are you saying that people don't get hurt from vaccines? I said, that's not what I'm saying. Your argument hinges on this central point, and it's wrong because it is underestimated, overestimated. We don't know. It's unverified. Yes, people have been injured by vaccines, but it is not to this degree, most likely. I definitely doubt it's underreported because it's voluntary. So what you're doing when you say this is proof and I show you that it's not proof is you pivot and move over to another argument that is somewhat related to what we're talking about. Okay? That's like, the reason it's called moving the goalpost is like saying, all right, it's too easy. Actually, it's funny, the NFL did this recently. It's too easy to kick a point after from the 3-yard line. Now you have to kick it from the 10-yard line. So you literally make it more difficult once the problem has been solved or your argument has had holes poked through it. So they then move the goalpost and have another argument, and they completely ignore the first argument. So what happens is you end up having 2 arguments. 1, don't you see that what you said was wrong? And 2, stop talking about that. We didn't finish talking about the first thing. And then you have another thing when you disprove that, or you refuse to engage with that, they claim that they won because now you're playing pigeon chess and the person is unqualified to be talking about this, and you just want to talk about point number 1, but they're on point number 2. So it gets really confusing, and it's just a constant switching of the goalposts. It's a constant moving of the argument, pivoting from one thing to another after you're disproving things because you, as a person that practices science, has philosophical doubt when you go into these arguments. Even if you agree with me, if my best friend, since I'm 3 years old, goes on a rant about something that I believe in, but he's talking about things that are patently false, I'm going to call him out on him. I'm like, dude, I agree with you, but the reasons you're using are not valid. That's like, you're talking about your opinion and you're giving facts to support your opinion, but your facts are not actually facts. They might be true to you, but they're not facts. So when you deal with that, you're constantly pivoting and moving goalposts, and it's really, really frustrating, specifically for somebody like me, a person like me. Okay, so to get back to the shirt, my awesome, awesome shirt of Peter Venkman. Peter Venkman is a scientist. He practices parapsychology and psychology. He's got PhDs in both of them. He worked for the University, I believe, of Columbia in Ghostbusters, which, fun fact, is, depending upon the time of day or year, my favorite movie. It's kind of a running tie between Ghostbusters, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, and Boondock Saints. So depending upon my mood, either one of those is my favorite. Right now it's Ghostbusters because I have the awesome shirt. But the dean of the science department comes in when he's trying to remove the Ghostbusters from their lab and has a quote that he addresses directly to Peter Venkman, where he says, "Your theories are the worst kind of popular tripe. Your methods are sloppy and your conclusions are highly questionable. You are a poor scientist, Dr. Venkman." He doesn't not call him a scientist. He just says that all of his methods are bad science. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, the science that Venkman is practicing is not good. There is bad science out there. There are people who, like I mentioned before, fake data. It can't be replicated. They don't have good experimental control. They're not using the best subject size, or they're not using the best methods. They're not using double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. They're not using ethical practices. They're flat out lying. There's a number of things that can happen to have bad science performed by scientists. The sloppy, poor scientist comment from Dean Yeager kind of transitions nicely into a Jerry Seinfeld bit where he says, everyone's doctor is the best. Never do you meet somebody and they say, oh, you got to be my guy. He's the worst. He's the absolute worst. The ugly truth of it is, not every person that goes to medical school, master's degree in applied behavior analysis, that goes to that's a government official. Not everyone graduated at the top of their class. Just because you are a construction worker does not make you a subject matter expert on all things construction related. What if you're a shitty construction worker? What if you've only been on the job for a week? My friend Len is an amazing electrician. He is a subject matter expert when it comes to that, along with union policies and practices, and some might even say politics. But I don't think that he's the best person to go to if I want to talk about the finer intricacies of creating a dovetail for a woodworking project I'm going on. So just because it's tangentially related doesn't make you a subject matter expert. Just because you are in the field does not mean that you are a subject matter expert. Just because you studied it doesn't mean you did well in it. There are different aspects of my own job which I would absolutely default to somebody else being a subject matter expert on. I primarily deal with adults, adolescents and adults. If you want somebody to come in and do early intervention with your 3-year-old, I understand the concepts, but there's way better and more qualified people than me to do that. I will pass you off to one of those people, happily. I will stay in my lane. It takes a ridiculous amount of dedication, intellect, and devotion to be a subject matter expert in something. These are types of people who get up in front of judges and juries and lawyers and argue and get paid thousands of dollars to refute or corroborate claims made by other people, testimonies and so on and so forth. If you don't feel comfortable getting up in front of that type of audience and having your credentials dragged through the mud or questioned, you're not a subject matter expert. I don't care how many YouTube videos you watch. I don't care how many Newsweek and Associated Press and Reuters, whatever you want to say, articles you have read. You are not a subject matter expert. Now, with that being said, there is something that happens with subject matter experts where you might be kind of parallel related. So imagine if, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a astrophysics expert. He's also extremely well-versed and articulate. Let's say he wasn't. Let's say that big brain of his that had all of that knowledge in it, he just couldn't articulate exactly what he wanted to say, and he needed to have an editor or a person or another person write his books for him. And by the way, I'm sure he does have somebody write his books for him, with him, not for him, but with him. He has such a devotion to physics and science that he doesn't have any brain space left to figure out how to entertainingly craft a sentence. So he's going to get somebody that's going to help write his book. Now, if you are that writer and you constantly write Neil deGrasse Tyson books, and you have somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson explaining something to you so that way you can then put it on paper and explain it to an audience of your similar intellect, or maybe even higher intellect than you have, you might eventually become a subject matter expert. Okay? So that person that I talked about before that was debating the vegan documentarian, he was a nutritionist and then was a journalist and was researching things through talking with other people and doing meta-analyses, other subject matter experts. So he was, subject matter expert by association. He still has more training than the person that read 15 different articles online and watched a couple of YouTube videos or looked at an infographic that was posted on Instagram or Snapchat. So when it comes to being a subject matter expert, you could have gone to school for applied behavior analysis and got a master's degree and been practicing for the past 14 years. Or you could be my supervisee, who has had the pleasure, I'm sure, of trying to pick my brain about certain things. So you're tangentially, parallelly, however you want to call it, related in terms of your intellect to that person, and you're going to take that and go on. Now, I might be a subject matter expert on one subject within this much larger field of behavior analysis. And there are other people that have been doing it for 30 years and 50 years. And people have written books and done countless areas of research. And people that have probably been in it for 14 years who have talked to more people than I have and therefore they're better at it. So like maybe a low to mid-level subject matter expert. There are people that are like super subject matter experts. So there's levels to this game, and it's really important to know what those levels are and where you fall in that pecking order. Okay? There's a meme that goes around that I've seen a couple times of a person that does welding, and it's what looks like shoddy welder work. I'm not a welder, so I'm probably using terminology incorrectly, and it just looks like crap. And they're like $15 an hour. And then there's beautifully like welded beads going all around this, this piece of metal, and it says $30 an hour. He goes, "You're not paying me for the work, you're paying me for my experience and my dedication to the craft. So I charge $30 an hour so that you can get this level of work. This is the level of work you're going to get for $15 an hour. So what do you want? Do you want the $15 an hour work that's probably going to break? Or do you want the $30 an hour work that's going to look neat and clean and be functional?" So again, subject matter experts. Not everyone can graduate at the top of their class. Not every person that is in medicine is qualified at this current stage to be talking about half of the things they're talking about when it comes to the coronavirus and mask wearing and hamster infestations with COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So be careful who you're relying on to be a subject matter expert. So that's my brief overview of science as it relates to today. The most important thing, and this isn't a note, this is just off the top of my head. For me, the most important part of science is the ability to be wrong and change based on new information. It's called a theory, not because it is unproven, but because there's always room for new information to come out that disproves a theory. At the current juncture, a theory is the highest form of evidence when it comes to science. That means that there was experimentation, that means that there was replication, and the same results were found over and over and over and over again by people that went into every single one of those experimentations and interactions with philosophical doubt, searching for the most parsimonious explanation. The simplest explanation that they didn't have any preconceived bias going into, that they ran a good, well-crafted experiment that showed cause and effect over and over and over again, the same as the first one. So be ready to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong, so long as you're wrong and you change your mind based on new, viable, reliable information. It's not called flip-flopping. It's not called changing your mind. It's altering your beliefs based on factual, evidence-based information. It's better to be wrong and say you were wrong and admit that you were wrong and strive for doing something correctly than holding on to old, antiquated beliefs after they were proved incorrect. Constantly be learning, constantly be growing, constantly be doubtful, but be ready to have an open mind and accept new information that probably or possibly contradicts your beliefs or your opinions. With that being said, take care, stay healthy. I'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you.